Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Inside Lowell Daily Pulse, the Thursday, August 7th edition of the Daily Pulse. I'm your host, Teddy Panos, coming to you from the WellPoint Studios here in beautiful, historic, and warming up downtown Lowell. Starting to get back to some summer weather out there, and things are heating up here in the WellPoint Studios because I'm excited today I gotta be honest with you, Kendrick. I haven't been this excited about a guest in here in a long time.
That's an honor.
No. Wait till the end of the podcast before you say that. You may regret it afterwards. But Kendrick 𝐷𝐿 is joining us here in studios. If you don't know Kendrick, recent graduate of Lowell High School, you're heading off to Westfield State, but you kind of garnered local fame, for lack of a better term, when you pushed back on the Lowell High School efforts to institute a cell phone ban. Suddenly a bunch of people, yours truly, but some powerful people as well, knew the name Kendrick 𝐷𝐿. Mm-hmm. We should have known it before, actually, because you've been very active for a long time. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but also kind of get your thoughts on a number of things that you're involved with and kind of get a sense of, well, where do people of your generation, where do the students see this city and how do they see the city? So I'm glad you're here. Yes. Welcome, Kendrick. Good to have you in our studios.
I appreciate it.
We're going to start the discussion in a quick second. Let me just thank my Daily Pulse sponsors. You know about Ray Booten, right? Licensed realtor in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, certified appraiser in both states as well. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home, a business, or a commercial property, Ray Booten is who you need to talk to. And you can find him easily enough online at realestaterayBooten.com. That's realestaterayBooten.com. Thank you as well to our friends at WellPoint. At WellPoint, your whole health is their whole point. And we remind you that WellPoint is the only healthcare plan offering healthcare benefits exclusively to Massachusetts GIC members. So thanks, WellPoint. Thanks, Ray. Some other sponsors we'll get to in a couple of seconds, but let's get right into it with Kendrick 𝐷𝐿 here. First, for folks, anyone who's a political junkie, local news junkie, certainly has been following the school building committee for the Lowell High School project, and you are one of two student representatives on that committee.
Yes, sir.
And you're not afraid to speak at these meetings, which I've noticed.
Yeah, no, I think this is a project that all of Lowell can really be proud of, but also that all of Lowell can have questions about. I think that I represent the taxpayer as well as students. And I think a lot of questions arise at these meetings, and I think it's important that the public get to see. And also the public gets the responses that we deserve. I think sometimes those administrative questions we get from the city don't really tackle what people, the taxpayers, want to know when it comes to this project. So absolutely, I'm never afraid to ask the real questions.
Yeah, and you've impressed me and many other people with some of the questions you've asked. And sometimes I feel like, or often I feel like you might be the only adult in that room. But let's talk about that project, because as a Lowell High graduate, you spent 4 years basically in a construction zone, one that ramped up from the demolition of the famed dentist office on Arcade Drive and the construction of the gym to the project. Eventually, by the time you started your senior year and graduated, the project had gone full scale into buildings that were actually you occupied, you and your fellow classmates.
Absolutely.
What do you make so far of the project? Has it gone as you would have as you expected and as you would have hoped?
I think, from the student perspective, I think it's really, students weren't really given an expectation, and we weren't really given updates to the project. So I think as a student, we didn't really expect much of the project. But I mean, as a Lowellian, the project has really been beautiful aesthetically. In terms of budgetarily, I've been very concerned, obviously, throughout. So as planned, I would probably say that this project hasn't gone as planned, but I think it's gone well enough that I think we can expect a positive enough outcome from this project that we'll be at least a little bit happier in the end with what's going on.
All right. The aesthetic point that you brought out, you think aesthetically it's beautiful. How was that a kind of a common thought process among those who are in there? And I guess my question is it really, is it as beautiful as other new schools that are out there and you may have traveled to while playing sports? Or is it just, well, we had such a such a disaster beforehand that it couldn't help but be better? Or what's your genuine thought on that?
Absolutely. I think the aesthetics of a building go really beyond how it looks like on the outside, right? I think a building is its foundation up. So I think to your point about what was there beforehand, I think in the section of the building that was built in the 1980s, what a lot of people don't really take into account is that even in those in those steel structures, we were still seeing asbestos in steel that was manufactured in the late 70s, and construction in the early 80s. So, that is already an issue, right? So replacing that is automatically a positive. And I think you also bring up a good point that while this school is beautiful, brand new, a lot of schools across the state that we're seeing built by the MSBA and by local governments are very beautiful, larger even. But I think contextually, with the spot that it is, at the corner of Arcan and Father Morissette, and considering what was there before, I think it's a positive architectural and aesthetic improvement. But I think you also bring up a good point that big white block can also kind of stick out like a plain thumb. But I also think, just contextualizing what was there before, it's just at that kind of tough intersection right there. So I think for where it's at and what we're working with, I think it's the best that we got.
Yeah, it's a challenging footprint based on where it is in the downtown. And I do think as I'm watching it spring up now, they probably made the best possible use they could out of the footprint that they had. How much of a disruption has it been to the learning? I hear conflicting reports. You talk to the politicians and you talk to the educators / administrators, well, the administrators, I should say, and well, yes, it's a construction zone, but we've done our best to mitigate it and minimal learning disruption and so on and so forth. I've heard from other people who have actually been in there for classes, no, there's a learning disruption. What did you find?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the earlier phases when we saw the heavy construction of what is now the brand new section of the building, when the brown 80s section of the building was still occupied, there was definitely a very heavy heavy disruption. You could hear banging from wind. I remember my my junior year, I would be in a classroom in the 1922 building, and during the hotter months, my teacher would open the windows and we would just hear constant banging from the roof and from just the other side of the canal. Of course, that wasn't a constant thing, but I'd say definitely around phases 2 and the beginning of phases 3, that was definitely very loud. If it became almost too loud in an area, I will say that, the school administration did a pretty good job of getting on it. How the construction administration did in responding to the school administration's request, I don't know. Because, a teacher would make a call down to, the office, say, we've got a loud noise. And then the office would say, okay, we're going to call the operations director. Operations director calls down the construction team. And it's a bureaucratic cycle that it really bogs the process down. So I think at times it was definitely manageable. At times it got very loud, but I definitely do not put any blame anywhere. I think our school administrators did exactly what they could have. They were very quick to pick up a phone and call. And then, just considering the construction administrator's task of having to deal with all the subcontractors, when a noise request comes up, I think every party did what they could, but I definitely will say that, distractions were still there, especially in the earlier phases. It's gotten better now that the project is really nearing its completion. But towards phases 1 and 2, there was definitely a noticeable, audible distraction.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know that the teachers and the administrators at least were responsive. And you also bring up a good point. It's like the guy operating the jackhammer, by the time he gets message from whether it's Skanska or Suffolk, and it goes down to the subcontract, 10, 15 minutes might have passed, and he kept jackhammering, which obviously a disruption, but I mean, I think anybody who really thought out the process would understand that there would be. So, but you don't feel like it affected your education?
No,
you still got a quality education?
No, absolutely. There was never air issues with the smell. There was never really. When you were inside of the occupied section of the building, it was you really saw zero construction. You saw no construction workers. You didn't see, the guys in the big neon shirts holding wooden beams, none of that. Very safe environment.
Good.
Everything was curtained off very well. Not even curtained off, actual temporary walls were built. So everything was very well contained. But yeah, I think just really noise. But of course, like you said, I think with a project of this size and what's going on, a half rehab, a half construction, all still being occupied, I think you have to expect some noises. So I think with what is actually being done, by looking at it in totality, I honestly think that they did a very good job at managing what happened. But yeah, I think it was a very good job on 𝐊𝐞𝐧𝐝𝐫𝐢𝐜 part on really creating a plan to delineate between school and work.
All right. Did you take any classes? Did you get to enjoy any classes in the new building?
Oh, absolutely.
You did.
Absolutely did.
What is it? Does it have all the modern amenities that you would
Yes.
expect, that people you might know from other school systems? They didn't cut corners. They did what they promised they were going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why I say that at the end of this project, I think Lowellians can expect a 21st and honestly a 22nd century high school. This is not the Lowell High School of past with creaking floorboards and lights that went out. This is a beautiful building, and the same sort of interior design that we're seeing in the brand new building is being brought over to the old sections of the building. So we're going to get a full rehab, and just it's going to look beautiful. And I think it's fitted out beautifully. And even looking at what the school committee is trying to do in the superintendent's office with bringing Chapter 74 vocational ed into the schools. And not only is that great, but the thing is, we already have spaces that have been built out that can accommodate these. The first floor of the brand new building has entire brand new laboratory and engineering spaces. All that's left is the actual classes and instructors. So I'm very excited to see what Chapter 74 vocational programs we can bring in, because I can assure you there is space, and the kids are ready. The kids are ready, and the school is beautiful.
All right. In terms of the construction, when did you start serving on the school building committee?
I believe my term began in late 2023 or early 2024. I remember it was a conversation that I had with Counselor 𝐊𝐿𝐤 about really getting student voices out there, not necessarily on the community, but how do we get students' concerns and voices addressed by the city council, and or the construction team? Because I think that's when we really heard those loud bangings, those real big issues with the construction. And I feel like it didn't make sense to me that students were in the middle of this, but there was no student being offered a chance to basically say, okay, this is what's going on. So I reached out to Counselor 𝐊𝐤𝐤, and we had a very earnest conversation, and I was very glad and happy that he agreed, that basically it's important that a student has the ability to basically voice their opinion about a construction project that's going on in their building. So after that, he filed a motion, and I was able to reach out to the manager and get that position. So I believe that was in early 2024 or late 2023.
Right. Do you get to stay on now that you've graduated, or do you have to relinquish the post to the next student?
I do not believe I will be resigning, or I have to. I think since the appointment was made by the city council, I would have to submit a resignation to the city council anyways. And I think the other student member is a senior right now, so she's still a current student. So she'll definitely bring all of her concerns that she's actively seeing to the meetings this year. But I think as a Lowell resident, as someone who's very interested in the urban development of Lowell and projects like this and big taxpayer projects, I think it's important to have some oversight, to have resident oversight, to have normal Lowellians look at this and say, okay, what's going on, and why are my dollars being spent for X, Y, and Z when they could go to A, B, and C? So I think for that reason alone, I think I'll probably stay on until the completion of the project.
Good. And if any politician is listening, the city manager, and I know you guys listen because I get the comments afterwards, Kendrick 𝐿𝐿 doesn't need to be a student representative anymore. He can just be a representative. You change people in and out all the time. Kendrick 𝐿𝐿 should have a seat on there.
Thank you, Teddy.
So if there's a negative to the project, clearly it's the unforeseen, quote unquote, circumstances, or not searched for circumstances, as I might argue. But the fact is, it's now gone way over budget.
Absolutely.
COVID. Great, we got that taken care of, but now we're talking about another 40 million, and let's be honest, I'm not the only one holding my breath that it stops there. Where did it go wrong? Kendrick? What happened? Was it all doomed from the start because not enough preparation work, not enough investigation was done, or was it just simply a matter of circumstance?
I think it's tough because I think that all the construction parties involved have done their due diligence. And I think they've done exactly what their policy of rehab is, and I think they've done exactly what they think that they've needed to do. But I think that I share very similar concerns with you that when this project was launched, I think the fact of the matter is we're dealing with a section of this building was built in the late 1890s. That is very old. There's no going around it. So why more bores and more wall tests weren't taken, especially in sections of the building that we may have known may have been problematic, especially in part of a building that was built in the 20s, the 1890s.
You were a 14-year-old student. You knew there was still asbestos in the building when we were told it had all been removed.
To that point, it's an old building. There should have been, more, but it's one of those situations where you live and you learn, I guess. But then also as a taxpayer, as someone who's really passionate about my community, it's disappointing because it's the taxpayers' dollars who are being spent along the way. The people who live and work in Lowell, the MSBA, the state, really, these dollars are being spent, are at an increased rate, and then we're basically being told to accept it, you know what I mean? And, a lot of questions are raised. And of course, I understand the people who look at this project and say, why didn't we do it at 𝐊𝐤? Why didn't we spend the money at 𝐊𝐤 and just save us $40 million? And I understand their point of view. But I think a lot of this, going back to your question, Teddy, is a lot of it is, I think a lot of more could have been done, but I think, it's a live and you learn situation. You know what I mean? I think the construction companies did what they thought was best. And I think we just have to move from there. You know what I mean? The taxpayers of Lowell are obviously bearing this, and that's something where I find issue. And that's why I want to really, doge this project, so to speak. I want to see how can we create efficiencies with this construction project. But I think it's really a lot of circumstance, and I think it's a live and you learn. From this point on, we've got to do better.
So you've been in on all those meetings. You've seen
Yes.
all those plans. You're privy to them. You even if you weren't sitting on the committee, you're the kind of kid, as we talked about before I hit record, that you were going to look at all those
over
documents.
those agendas. Yeah.
Is 𝐊𝐤𝐳 and then /Suffolk and everybody else, are they being truthful when they say there's nothing else that can be done? Because I heard one, obviously if you want to cut costs, you got to do quote unquote value engineering, AKA cut out certain components, certain bells and whistles that would be nice, but may not be necessary. They say it's too late. We're too far down in the process. Do you trust them?
I trust them in their ability to construct a building. But I'll be honest with you, Teddy. I think that, when it comes to instituting value engineering, I do think it's possible. And, when they say, oh, we've got to go back to MSBA, well, then let's go back to MSBA. Let's have a meeting with the MSBA and let's have a conversation about how this building is really bleeding out little taxpayer dollars. And I would hope that the MSBA would be able to come to an understanding, and I would also hope that the city would advocate for itself and would say, okay, let's go to the MSBA and let's say, okay, let's cut back on X, Y, and Z that we had planned for the building so that we can save $1, $2, or maybe $3 million. If they really want to include all the bells and whistles, go ahead. But I think as of right now, with the increases in contingency and the new slab that we just had to pour in the basement, I think it's important that value engineering is looked at. And I don't think that it's impossible. No, I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah. So there are people that have told me, people who know construction said there are good Lowellians, they may even have been talking about you, who are working to get that number down even further. I know they got it from 47 to 40. They think it can come down even further. And there's a bunch of folks that think you don't even need to value engineer it. They think that timelines and scheduling can be adjusted so that maybe there isn't enough so much money going to architects and supervisors and whatnot. Have you delved far enough into that? Have you talked to construction folks, some of the other folks on that committee who are into construction, is that a possibility? Because I think if you have to value engineer, I think it should be looked at, but ideally I think you should give the city, the students, what was promised to them, the teachers and everyone who works in that building, what was promised to them. And if you can look to save, it should be saved elsewhere. Do you subscribe to that theory that there might be some room in it? I don't want to say they're taking advantage of the of the misfortune of the subflooring that needs to be worked on, and maybe padding the schedule to extend it a year.
Yeah.
What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I genuinely think that, and I'll answer the question in two parts, because I think that scheduling, in terms of the scheduling pushback, I honestly think that, and again, I'm not in the meetings that happen usually every Thursday with the construction team and our school administration, but I do think that there could have been certain ways in terms of keeping the students in one part of the building, that we could have schedule this in a way where we wouldn't have had to put it out so much. Because when you extend a project in terms of its time, you're also extending how much money you're spending on the project. So I think I think first that should have been addressed, the whole scheduling issue. I think I don't see why students weren't just kept in the phase that I was for my senior year again, so that the yellow building can just be knocked out and then we can just finish it. I don't, you know what I mean? It's a lot of questions there. And then going into just the inflated budget, I think it's a mixture of a lot of things. And I think you bring up a good thing. These architects and supervisors and the construction managers are getting very inflated budgets, and these salaries are such overinflated, and it's unnecessary. So I think it's just, I almost want to agree with you that I think this issue with the basement slab has allowed, or maybe empowered, or maybe pushed these construction companies to kind of say, okay, well, we can push X, Y, and Z off too till the till the later months, because we got to deal with the slab first. So, but it shouldn't be that way,
The architect, and again, no disrespect to the architects,
Yes.
and I'd love you to all get a fair wage and whatnot, but the architect designs the building, right? We're not changing the design. I mean, we're changing the slab, but we're not going to add new rooms. We're not going to change the pitch of the roof.
Yeah.
Why does the architect have to get paid for an extra year?
That's a great question, Teddy. That's a great question, Teddy. That's a great question, Teddy. I don't understand why the architect has to get paid. I don't understand why we still have an architect firm still on. I think we should be entirely on engineering, especially considering that, we have a slab that was completely misunderstood, walls that are 4 different types of brick. You've got steel beams that are getting cut into. It's tough. So we've got to really address things as they come.
Congratulations. You just went from the thoughtful, respectful young man to the guy who's pissing on everybody out there. You may have made an enemy there, but again, I think if you look hard enough, if you sharpen the pencils and work those erasers a little bit, I think we can save the taxpayers a few bucks while not cutting out a Bunsen burner or a chem lab from the kids in the school. We're chatting with Kendrick 𝐿𝐿, Lowell High graduate, but somebody who, while he was in high school and even now that he's a graduate of Lowell High, is very actively involved in our community, has a lot of thoughts about the community, and ultimately one day probably wants to serve the community. We'll talk a little bit about that as well as going to circle back to that cell phone ban that he fought at Lowell High School, and now he might have to fight at Beacon Hill. But we'll talk about that. Let me just quickly thank our Daily Pulse sponsors, Ray Booten, licensed realtor, Masson, New Hampshire. Find him online, realestaterayBooten.com. Thanks as well to WellPoint. At WellPoint, your whole health is their whole point. Washington Savings Bank, banking that feels like home. Make the switch now to Washington Savings Bank. TMI Properties, quality and value at every price point. Find your perfect space with TMI. Mahoney Oil, providing warmth and protection to Greater Lowell, Southern New Hampshire since 1925. The Greater Lowell Community Foundation, improving the quality of life in our communities through strategic, impactful philanthropy. the Francis E. Preventure Insurance, insuring our most valuable assets since 1982, and by the Massachusetts Pirates, bringing all the hard-hitting action and excitement of arena football to the Mill City. Thanks to all our sponsors. Thanks to Kendrick again. All right. You fought that cell phone ban and you lost that political battle. Yes. Welcome to my world. Yeah. I lose political battles all the time. You lived through it for the year. Mm-hmm. Do you still hold the same position? Did something that happened there change your thoughts, or did it only serve to reinforce your thoughts?
Yeah, I think my original focus with fighting back with the local cell phone ban was less about kids having phones in their hands. I don't agree with that. I think school should be distraction place free. I think no kid should be using their phone, have a phone in their hand and then they have their math assignment right there. That's unacceptable. That's not how kids learn. That's not how I learn. None of my peers learn that way. My issue was with how quick it was sort of rushed through. A lot of questions were up in the air. How are these lock boxes getting paid for? Why weren't parents or students involved? That was really my issue. I feel like policy should really be all encompassing and engage all stakeholders. And I think that specific policy didn't. So I think that was my original issue with it. Going back to the actual, the tangible policy itself and how it worked. It clearly worked. It was a policy of, if I see the phone, security's getting called, right? So that was the policy basically, and there was a box that you put your phone in. So I think that it did its job. I think phones were obviously a lot less present because the looming consequence was there, that the teacher had the right to pick up the phone and call security to nab the phone from you for the day. But I think that definitely didn't stop kids from, still sneaking their phone in class. I did it, I'll be honest. So phones are still present in school. But I will say that it's definitely decreased as a distraction. Where so in the past you could kind of just, take out your phone, you get a little text message you could text. If the teacher really thought it was a problem, they could, yell at you. But if they didn't care. But I think it was good in the sense that it created a uniform policy. I think that's important in school districts, especially school districts as large as Lowell, creating a uniform policy that can be followed by all administrators and teachers. But I think it was a little too vague in certain areas when it was kind of pushed out. But I think, overall, I'll be honest, it was a positive policy. It's something that I agree with. I just think that government in general should do better to increase stakeholder input.
And I'm glad you pointed out that you had some procedural concerns with it more so than anything else, and you were not involved with that famous social media planned walkout. Mm-hmm. So you say it worked from the discipline, right? They scared you into thinking, I'm going to take your phone and call security. Did it work, though, the way they told us it would work, that it would eliminate distractions? Not just eliminate distractions, but would foster more interaction between students rather than you talking, texting somebody on your phone. You'd actually engage your classmates and it would make for a better all social and learning environment. Does a cell phone ban really do that, Kendrick?
I'll be honest with you, no, because I think what a lot of adults and politicians, especially those who aren't really in classroom environments every day, don't understand is that a lot of curriculum has moved digital, especially at the high school level. Almost everything is done on a computer. Almost nothing is done on a piece of paper except for maybe math class.
Every time I've been in a middle school or elementary school, those kids are learning on laptops.
Yep, and it's only accelerated at the high school level. Every class you're in, everything's assigned on a computer. And it was no different at Lowell High School. So it was this paradoxical situation where, we put our phones away, but we're still, just kind of sat in front of a technology screen and basically told, do your work. Sometimes shut up. Sometimes, you can talk to your group. It wasn't always like that, and not all teachers teach like that, and it's not like that entirely throughout LHS. But I think the heavy dependence on digital learning right now, and of course it's it's the technology we're using nowadays. That's how it is. But I think technology has advanced so fast, and it's been adapted to educational environments so fast that we haven't really taken a step back to look at the impacts of actual educational technology. Kids who sit in front of a laptop all day and then bring that laptop home to do their homework in front of that laptop. It's a lot. You know what I mean? It's basically a work computer. And I think that also kind of limited the interactions. We were focused on doing our work. We had no time, and a lot of kids. And then to that fact, a lot of kids bring in their personal computers. You know, that's something that we were allowed to do at Lowell High School. So
Personal computers which have software that
yeah,
text people
exactly.
from them, right?
MacBooks,
Just like I do.
MacBooks. You would, you'd sit in class and you'd look over someone's MacBook and they were texting their friend, and it wasn't necessarily bad that they were doing that, but it's just it's kids adapt, and I guess so do schools, so to speak. So I think it didn't necessarily increase interactions among students. Like I said, kids adapt. If we really wanted to send a text, we would sneak the phone or get a MacBook, and you can send on the Apple messaging through the MacBook. But yeah, most of the work is digital, so it's really just still creating that digital environment.
Yeah, we tell parents, limit your child's screen time. However, the moment they get into first grade, you're giving them a screen for 8 hours a day, and then
they can bring it home.
And the point you make is you bring it home, and you got to do your homework on it as well.
Yep.
You sound like a little bit like an old soul. You sound like an old fart like me. You think there should be a little bit more pen and paper, books. We'll go work it out on we had blackboards. You guys have whiteboards or some kind of digital screen.
Yeah, the digital screens. Everything's digital now. Our whiteboards are all digital too. We call them clear touches. But honestly, I think it's really just looking back at education in a whole, right? The implementation of how do we teach kids. And I think teachers obviously we put teachers through professional developments, and teachers are human beings who they have their own ways of teaching. But I think we're giving these teachers materials and curriculum that are really not enriching. So I think not necessarily more paper, but I think more interaction, more exploring real world situations as opposed to abstract ideas. I think we're still a little focused on abstract ideas. I think vocational education is great. I'm a big fan of the VOC. I didn't go, but I'm a big fan of the VOC and just career education in general. I think are all important. So I think taking a look at education in general, at the state of education, and really saying, let's make education less about abstract thought and or certain opinions and or beliefs, and take it back to really technical career and just the basics, so to speak. You know what I mean? I think that's really important. It can be done digitally, paper, whatever, but I think increasing student interaction, getting students talking with each other, talking about things going on in the world with each other, I think is really important.
You said technology is changing so quickly, and sometimes people haven't even had time to pause and think about what it's doing. AI is that on steroids.
Yeah.
How is that going to change education? You're getting into college now at a time where we're told it's going to start to take over every single component of our lives. Is it a good thing or a bad thing for education?
For education, I'll be honest with you, AI has already mostly taken over the education space, I'd say. I think you ask any student at the high school level if they use ChatGPT to do an assignment, the answer is going to be yes.
Of course
the answer is going to be yes.
They'd be dumb not to.
Exactly. But I think also to that effect, I think AI has been on two different opposite ends of the spectrum. AI has been this big boogeyman that a lot of people have been trying to crack down on, but AI has also been this amazing futuristic tool that so many people have been so proud of. So I think in that, we're seeing tools like ChatGPT, this amazing free AI generative tool where, you copy and paste your assignment in and boom, it's done. But then you're also seeing on the opposite end, a lot of school administrators have been very quick to implement AI detection software in a lot of our software that we upload our assignments to. There's AI detection software now. Teachers will, and then there's AI detection sites that are completely free. They'll copy and paste our work into the site. And, if it's AI, it's a 0, stuff like that. So kids have been adapting to AI, using it. Teachers and administrators have been adapting to AI, using it to catch kids who use AI. So it's been used on both ends of the education space and without a purpose. I think it's began dominating the educational space, but with no clear purpose. AI is really just there. It's right, artificial intelligence. But I'm someone who personally believes that artificial intelligence should not be in a place where intelligence should be manually instructed and created. But I just think, it's already definitely dominated a lot of the educational spaces.
All right. And wrapping up the cell phone discussion, now there's you talked about it. It'd be nice to have a uniform policy.
Yeah.
Well, now there's legislators in Massachusetts who are trying to do just that, a statewide ban. Are your feelings on the statewide ban similar to what they are locally, that it ultimately it's not going to make a difference because kids will find a way around it?
Yeah, and more so with the statewide ban, I think, my concern or issue with the statewide ban is less the actual, obviously you're right, Teddy, that this is really not gonna kids are gonna adapt. I'll put it like that, and I'll leave it at that. But I think my personal issue comes in with the fact that, the Senate president and all top Beacon Hill Democrats are so quick to be very proud of this legislation, and they have their big press conference where they show it off. But legislation like this is not what's needed in Massachusetts. It's not tangible. Legislation like this does not help the homeless veteran who's sleeping under a bridge. You know what I mean? And I think that's my issue. I think now in Massachusetts is not a time where the Senate president and the House, and the House Speaker should be parading this beautiful bill that puts, phones in little pouches on the door in the classroom. It's great, and I think it's a important piece of policy, but I don't think that it's relevant. I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think it's what. Knowing Massachusetts bureaucracy, knowing how long it takes for bills to come out of the general court and to become actual pieces of policy affecting me and you, it's disappointing to see that our legislators are spending their time crafting and pushing through a bill that's, putting phones in boxes.
To your knowledge, have they avoided the mistakes that you say the city of Lowell or Lowell High made? And has there been engagement with students, with class presidents or whatever, student representatives? Has there been engagement with parents who also pushed back, or are they kind of following the same path as Lowell High? Here's the policy. We know better. Yeah, we'll tweak a thing or two here, but we're going to shove it down your throat.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't follow each legislator who, filed this bill enough to know what their local, stakeholder input sessions looked like for this bill. But just based off the way that, the Senate president was so proud to, unveil this bill, it just basically shows that a lot of their priorities are just not exactly where I believe they should be. Even if this was something that, obviously all bills that come out of the State House, they go through a testimony and a committee hearing and all that. So I understand that there must have been some input on that level, but I think the fact of the matter is, at a local level, as a student, I've seen that, sure, it's worked in the sense that as students, we've known the consequences, and we've made sure that our phones are not visible. We'll put it like that. But that, you know what I mean? It's kids are still willing to adapt. And I think the fact of the matter is Massachusetts is dealing with so many other issues that are so pressing. I personally don't understand or agree with the fact that our legislators are spending so much time pushing through a bill that really affects not a lot of people.
Oh, one question. Did they ban the smartwatches, the Apple Watches and my Android smartwatch? Has that been banned, or just the cell phone?
I think it's just the cell phone devices. I mean, I think in the actual legislation, which, you did send over to me and I did read, I think it said that DESE would create, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education would create a model policy and would have districts file their policy with them. So, they could review all that. But I think that is even another example of Massachusetts bureaucracy. We're pushing everything onto DESE, and DESE saying, okay, local districts file it with us. And it's just this monotonous cycle of just files of policies that it's really a mess. So maybe smartwatches will be included. I guess that's up to the
localities. Did Lowell High allow you to bring a smartwatch in?
Yeah.
Or did they make you put those in the box too?
No, that wasn't even enough space in the boxes for the watches. No, kids still had their watches, and like I had mentioned, MacBooks still have Apple messaging technology on them, so that was still a tool for kids. And it just, like I said, kids adapt, and it's I guess it's up to government to adapt too. But I just don't think that adapting to how kids use their phone is exactly what government should be spending their time and energy on right now.
Speaking of things government spending its energy on, there are two bills, one in the Mass House. Oh God, I forgot to write down the number. There's a House version and a Senate version.
Yes.
Pushing back the school start times. The House version says no earlier than 8:30 a.m. for high school students, 8 a.m. for middle school students. The Senate version says no earlier than 9 a.m. for high school, 8:30 for middle school.
Wow.
And both bills say this would be implemented by July 1st, 2028, the latest, or sooner if a collective bargaining agreement that a particular municipality has ends. I'll give a little editorial comment here, just looking at who's filed these and how many people have signed on to them, or shall I say not signed on to them. I don't think it's got a chance right now.
Yeah.
That said, the reason for it is, well, kids need more sleep. High school kids in particular, because the middle school kids would be going a half hour earlier, but per either of these laws. Is that, as a student, did you feel that the start of school time, what time did Lowell High starts before 8, right?
Yes, Lowell High starts before 8. All students are expected to be in the building by 7:55.
Okay. Did you feel that was a detriment to learning? Did you not get enough sleep? Did it slow you down during the day?
Yeah, I mean, those are great questions, Teddy. And I'll be honest with you. It definitely caught up to me my senior year. And, we all talk about senioritis, but I think, my senior year, I definitely hit me that, this is very early. And I think, it just, the whole schedule is very early. I mentioned 7:55, but our school building actually opens at 7:20. That's when the breakfast begins. Our free breakfast begins for all students to be in the caf eating breakfast at 7:20. And obviously it's understandable. Some kids have to be out of the house very early. Parents going to work. They don't want their kids at the house anymore. They got to go. I understand that. But I think a majority of children or youth, teenagers, struggle with making it to school on time. Our current rate of tardism at Lowell High School, I think, is very high. I haven't seen the rates, but I do think it's high. I think if you...
It feels high to you from being in class with me.
Yes.
Typical that you'd have at least one student walking in.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In my first period, it would never be a situation where the whole class is there.
You weren't one of those tardy kids, were you?
Not until senior year, I'll be honest. Once senioritis kicked in, my coming time was a little bit more towards the 8:15 time.
Senior year, you just outright skip, forget tardy.
Yeah, there you go. But no, and it's tough because so 7:55 is the expected time for students to come in, and then we have this sort of buffer period where we're supposed to go to our homerooms, where attendance is taken for the day. And then at 8:15, the classes start. First period starts at 8:15. So immediately after 8:15, if you come in, you're immediately considered tardy for the whole day. Tardy for first period. And a lot of kids, if you stand in the main entrance of Lowell High School, the brand new main entrance of Lowell High School at 8:30, the lines to check in for late students who come in to check in and they scan their IDs and they get a late slip. The lines are massive. They are massive. And it's not just because we're a school of almost 4,000. It's because a lot of these kids genuinely are waking up a little bit later than what's being expected of them.
Many are walking to school, half-hour walk from the lower Highlands or other parts of the city.
Absolutely.
Right?
I was one of those. I would have to walk all the way from South Lowell in the Gorham Street area all the way down up to Lowell High School. And that was an easy walk. That was about 15 to 20 minutes every day. So, having to, and then now you're expecting kids to become commuters. And then there's kids obviously who work in the afternoons, some later into the night. So you have kids who come out of school, they go immediately to work. They're working long shifts. They got to work at 9:30 at night. They got to go home and do their homework. Then they're not even sleeping by 11 o'clock, some 11:30, midnight. And then they got to get up by 5:36. It's definitely a lot for a lot of kids, and I understand the push to push it back. But like you said, I just think the support is just not there right now.
So 2 schools of thought on that, and I may show my age. What's bedtime? And did your bedtime that you were required to be in bed, no TV, no electronics or whatever, did that extend with each year that you got older, or are kids kind of freelancing it now?
I'll be honest with you. I think it's 2 things. I think one, we're seeing that as kids mature, a lot of parents are really keeping their foot off the brake in terms of, okay, you're doing your own thing. I'll let it be, even if that means you're going to sleep at 1 o'clock in the morning in your room, and I have no idea about it. So I think that's happening a lot. But also what's happening is that a lot of parents are, what I'm seeing, a lot of parents, a lot of children too, are suffering from this overt need to be with technology, because so many parents are, especially, and it's so sad, working in a childcare environment as well. I see this a lot where parents are really just putting their kids in front of a screen. So you're basically grooming these kids to become these individuals who are just so attached to their screens, or attached to things that are not really important, such as sleeping. So when they become 13, 14, 15 years old, when they go into high school, they're able to just stay up till 2:30 in the morning, like it's nothing, like they don't have school in the morning. Because I think it's not necessarily a child problem. I think that parenting has become very lackadaisical and very laid back nowadays. Things have become so convenient just to give something to your kid to stop them from whining, that a lot of parents have just taken that to their advantage, and it's become an issue. And a lot of kids and now teenagers are feeling that and acting in ways that we haven't seen before. Like someone, back in your days, a normal 13, 14-year-old wouldn't act, because they weren't given screens to calm down, or just allowed to do, for lack of a better term, whatever they want.
So you're, from what it sounds like, neither you nor most of your contemporaries were told 9 o'clock, you're in your room, all electronics are off and left in the kitchen, family room, wherever, and read yourself to sleep or whatever. Is that, are those days gone?
That, I'll be honest with you, I think those days are gone. I think with how, especially with how, pop culture has, created, or in the mainstream media and pop culture has created such an environment where kids are so addicted to what they're seeing, celebrities on their phones doing X, Y, and Z, that, it's become more ample and convenient for parents to just cater to what their kids want as opposed to what their kids need. Because it's easier just to do what your kids want, right? And then you can just silence them. But it's that's not the point, right? It's kids, there should be some real structure. I think that's what's lacking, just because, modern culture and modern media and modern society has really made things so easy and so just gummed down. Everything can be watched on a screen. Everything can be done with a little computer in your pocket, and it's trickling down to kids now.
So what are you doing when you're staying up till 11, 12? You shocked me by saying 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Are the kids just talking to friends? Are they on their screens reading? Are they binge watching? Are they waiting for the last Sports Center or anything?
Yeah.
What are they doing?
I mean,
stay up that
a
late?
lot of what kids are doing nowadays is really on your phone. You're playing video games, talking with friends on the phone. That's really a lot of it. And I'll be honest with you, you bring up an interesting, point. The Sports Center, even that's something I'm seeing, die down a lot. I'm not seeing kids watch sports a lot. Obviously, there's so many athletic kids. I was one, but I was never big. I personally was never big on watching a baseball game and stuff like that. So, I think kids really are on their technology, on their screens. If they're not on their computer playing games or talking to their friends, they're on their phones doing that, or they're on their Xbox or PlayStation doing that. So many screens have become available to kids that, if one is put down or one is taken away, you just turn to the other one.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when I was looking to see, what are the arguments for and against later school times, because again, my age, I'm about to hit 60. You're like, for hundreds of years, people went to school at 7:30 in the morning and look at, they turned out great. The greatest generation, blah, blah, blah. But, a lot of studies show kids aren't getting enough sleep, and that's what they're trying to address with these later school times. And certainly, it will help if you start the school day an hour later. Assuming, but as kind of what I'm hearing from you, well, you're still, even if you go to bed at 11 or 12, you're still not going to get enough sleep if you wake up at 6 instead of at 5.
Yeah.
Also, what's to stop you from saying, oh, I don't have to wake up till 6:30. I'll stay up till 1 every night.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it whether they do it or not, will it make a difference, I guess is my question. Will kids still be able to get enough sleep, or it sounded like early on when we started this discussion, you said parenting and learned behaviors need to change, period, to really address this lack of sleep issue.
Yeah, I think I think it won't help until, like you said, those learned behaviors and what kids are really getting up to change. Because even if we push back the start date to 8 o'clock, it's not going to change the kids who tend to go to sleep at 1 or 2 in the morning every day because they're, on their phones, texting or watching YouTube or whatever. That is not going to change. A law passed in Beacon Hill is not going to change that. What's going on in a bedroom in North Andover, that's not going to change that. So it's more so, I think kids themselves need, if this law were to ever pass, kids would need to really, first of all, this would need to be marketed heavily and shared and basically given to the public saying, we've done this. And kids would really have to take that into account. Now I get an extra hour of sleep. Am I going to waste it or am I going to use it? It's up to kids. It's not, you can pass the law and you can see how it works, but again, it's still up to the kids to implement their own positive behaviors.
Some interesting stuff, and it's interesting to hear it from an 18-year-old's perspective, an eloquent 18-year-old's perspective. All right, so you're going to Westfield State.
Yes, sir.
You're going to study urban planning.
Yes, sir.
Why? Why do you want to be an urban planner?
That's an awesome question, Teddy. I mean, I've grown up in Lowell, and really these past few years in my teenage years, I'd say the last 4 years, starting when I was 14 and 15, starting at Lowell High School, I'd have to walk to school, and something that I really believe in now that I began believing in then is seeing Lowell at the pedestrian level. I'm someone growing up, you being in the backseat of a car, mom's car, you don't really care where you're going, just going to have some fun. But when you're forced to walk 15 minutes to Lowell High School from your house at 7 o'clock in the morning, you stop to take note of things, and you make note of things going on in the community, and that was me. So that really got me involved and interested in Lowell, and then paying attention to really what Manager Golden's administration is doing and what the council has been urging him to do is really fascinating. As someone passionate about Lowell, it's so fascinating to see all the steps that the manager and his team are taking to actually implement the council's wishes, right? To actually develop the urban environment of Lowell. And so I think, why do I want to go into urban planning? It's exactly that. I've been so influenced by exactly what Manager Golden is doing, by what the council is pushing him to do. It's fascinating. And I personally, I want to continue that. You know what I mean? I want to be someone who aids in exactly what's going on. So I think I've been fascinated by the work being done by Manager Golden, Manager Rose, Baez Rose. She's an amazing woman. All our assistant city managers have done a great job in really influencing my ability to perceive, urban environments and really to perceive city government. So I give great credit to Manager Golden. I thank him for giving me certain opportunities, and I definitely give him the thanks for putting my eyes on municipal management, and then really DPD as a whole and the projects they're undertaking really opened my eyes to the actual urban development part of it.
You seem kind of positive, whereas most 18-year-old, most probably don't give a crap, but the ones that do are seeing negatives out there. You see positives. Why? Why are you so optimistic? What do you see that makes you so positive?
I think, going to your point about a lot of 18-year-olds maybe don't feel the same way, it's really because I think a lot of people my age, if they do focus on politics, it's all at the national level. It's all, what's the Trump administration doing? What is my preferred candidate of this party doing? And sure, it's important. It's always important to stay informed with what the federal administration is doing. But I think what's also important to note is that what affects you as an individual every single day is what goes on in your city hall, what goes on in your street, in your neighborhood. And that is why local government is so important. And I'm positive because I'm looking only at local government. I'm not looking at what the Healy administration is doing. I'm not looking at what the Trump administration is doing. I'm looking at what's going on in Lowell. And Lowell has got so much great going for it. We've got Link, the Front Runner City program, and all these amazing things. The high school is nearing its completion. there's so many great positives in the city. That's why I personally feel so positive, because I feel that it's important to stay grounded in local politics and really understand what's going on around you. And it's hard not to stay positive when it's all positivity going on here in Lowell.
Is the city? That's not all positive. Negative.
We know that.
sales.
No, we know that.
Is the city, is the government, and by extension the schools, are they doing enough to alert the youth about the importance of being involved in, especially in local issues? My hunch is they're probably spending too much time getting them involved in national issues or international, and not enough getting involved in local issues. Are they doing enough in your mind? Is it working against them if they're not doing enough?
I don't think that the city and the government in general, I'm talking about, of course, all three levels, but I don't think that they're doing enough. But I also think to that aspect, I also don't think that it's the government's role to empower people to become engaged. I don't think that it's the city manager's job to knock on doors and say, go out and vote. That is not his job.
Jesus,
you know what I mean?
Like me with that. Cut it out.
It's not his job. But I do think that it's a community's role, right? It's all of our jobs together to really empower everybody, including youth. So I think it's more so on the nonprofits, right? On the community leaders, to really, reach out to the youth, especially our nonprofits, because I feel like they have a bigger, reach to the youth. A lot of nonprofits that even serve directly, teenage age residents. Because like I said, the city is not responsible for engaging people. But I do think that there's certain things that the city could undertake. I'm a personal big believer in 16-year-old municipal voting age. If the city of Lowell reduced our municipal voting age by only just 2 years, I think we could see a big turnout. I think a lot of 16-year-olds are very passionate about what's going on. And I think if they knew that they had an ability to make their voices heard in an election, I think that would be really empowering for them. So I think that's an example of how the city could kind of come in and do their bidding. But I think a lot of it is up to, our nonprofits and really our residents themselves and our youth themselves to say, okay, I'm 16, I'm 17, I'm 18, but I still am noticing that trash is not getting picked up from my street. I'm also noticing that, food at my school is not good. And it always makes me proud to see school committee meetings where there's middle schoolers or even elementary school students who are speaking to the committee members, because that's exactly what all kids should be doing. If you have a problem with your school lunch, go to the school committee, stuff like that. So I think it's definitely, it's not necessarily on the government. I think, just our community needs to be informed more in general, whether that's up to our schools, our nonprofits. I just think the community really needs to be informed in general.
Are those of us in media doing enough to engage your generation?
Again, it's not necessarily that it's, the Lowell Sun or Inside Lowell's job to put out an article specifically for the teenagers saying, go out and vote. But I think, again, more so, how can we get 17, 18, 19-year-olds to get a subscription to the Lowell Sun to read it, or to open up Inside Lowell, which is a free articles, and to really read in what's going on and understand what's going on. How do we address that? Because kids aren't doing that, right?
How do we? And what sites are they going to?
I think a lot of exactly. I think that goes back to the main issue where national politics is taking over everything. And when we look at things like Instagram and TikTok, where the feeds are so hyper curated by Meta and these ByteDance or whatever company controls TikTok now, these algorithms and these For You pages are created in a way where, on top of the normal content that the kids want to see, occasionally they'll get these interspersing of news, but it's never local. You'll never get a TikTok of like NBC 10 of what's going on in North Andover. It's really, NBC News' official TikTok account, and there's something about this bill that, President Trump is trying to push through that's like about X, Y, and Z, and that gets kids fired up. You know what I mean? And you have kids are more knowledgeable about, the situation with the immigration policy at the federal level than they are with, what's going on at, in the local level. And I think that's because sites like TikTok and Instagram and even Snapchat are pushing the news that is being pushed on those sites is entirely from mainstream, Fox, MSNBC.
So we need local news influencers.
Yes,
To some
absolutely.
degree, right?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I think we need to really, it just needs to be a national refocusing on our local communities. I think we're too hyper fixated on what's dividing us naturally and not on what's uniting us. I think the fact of the matter is that our local community is what literally unites us. The people who live down your street are the people who will always be living down your street, right? That you're united by that fact. So focus on that. And that's just something that just has to happen, I guess, nationally, especially, here, but it's tough. And I guess it starts with just a movement.
Some people have said to me, and young folks, your generation, that even when we do talk about things, we're trying to talk to the youth, we're not talking about the things the youth cares about. Is there a disconnect? Is that a lot of the problem, that I simply don't know what's important to you or to your youth? And are you more willing to listen to it coming from somebody? If somebody your age were to be sitting on this side of the mic, would your contemporaries be more interested in that than hearing me say it? Even if because some of the things you say are things that I say. But would they listen to me, or would they just brush me off as an old geezer but listen to you?
I think youth definitely gravitate towards ideas that they agree with. I think that's why Bernie Sanders has such a high youth following. So many young, 20-something-year-olds who really believe in Bernie. But that's because his messaging is resonant with what's going on with those groups, right? So, I absolutely think you could deliver message, Teddy, and kids would absolutely agree with it. It's just about what message you're delivering. Certain issues that kids care about, when it comes to paying for college, right? FAFSA funding, I think, is something very important. Housing in general, the future of housing is something that kids are very interested and passionate about. Kids all want to, have their own house in the future, but the fact of the matter is housing is a mess,
Good
right?
luck.
So it's issues like that directly affect the future, less phone policy, right? Is that the issues that older individuals care about, when younger people are, we're struggling to pay for college, we're struggling to get our first apartment, our first home, down payments are so high, interest rates are high. These are all things that are directly affecting people who are going into that 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 range, that 16 to 20 range. All those things are directly affecting people. Even policies when it comes to what goes on at the RMV and with cars and with driving records and stuff like that, affecting, younger drivers. So I think stuff like that is important, that we hark and focus on policies like that as well. Because to answer your question, I think it's good that whoever delivers the message understand the people that they're speaking to or speaking for. Whether it's me or you, I think that whatever, if the message is resonant, people will subscribe to it, I think. So it's just about really understanding the base and understanding who you're talking to and what they need.
Do you find that your generation also, I think one of the mistakes we make is that we all kind of lump you all in together, and we say, well, if Kendrick thinks this, then every 18-year-old thinks this. How much diversity of thought is there in the younger generations? How much do you see?
It's tough, because in an urban environment like Lowell, it's and in a state like Massachusetts, we live in, the fact of the matter is, this is a one-party state, right? So, and if you're not part of that party, you immediately stick out like a sore thumb, so to speak. So in an urban environment like Lowell, or Lowell High School, a lot of the viewpoints that my peers have are they follow the theme very one-dimensional, right? And that's not to say that there aren't peers who differentiate that, but I think especially here in Massachusetts, here in Lowell, a lot of youth are very progressive. And so there's not a lot of delineation in exactly what they're advocating for and believing in. What I've seen personally is that youth who are more perhaps conservative leaning developed their conservative views a little bit later on. perhaps when they're in college, when they're going for that, business degree or whatever it may be, finance degree or whatever it may be. That's when their conservative beliefs really grow, when they begin to learn about finances and stuff like that. And I think a lot of kids are being so, just shown what's going on in the mainstream, at the national level, that it's really helping them form opinions about national issues that, of course, forms their whole political opinion. So I think, me personally, I haven't seen too much delineation in my peers and what they believe and advocate for. But that's, again, because we're just in such an environment where one viewpoint is not necessarily pushed more so than the other, but that it's encouraged in this environment, in the state that we live in. It's obviously pushed more so than the other. But and not to say that there's kids who disagree with one another on certain issues, but I definitely think that youth are a lot more united on issues than older generations.
Right. So it's interesting you say that, and there's an old saying that if you're 20 and you weren't a liberal, you didn't have a heart. If you're 40 and you weren't a conservative, you didn't have a brain. I think you touched on that about as people age. But polling is showing a shift towards, I don't want to say conservative, but certainly Donald Trump seems to have caught the attention of certain college-age students.
Yes.
Now, you're saying here in Massachusetts, and I tend to agree with you, that doesn't seem to be as much of a factor as it is in the rest of the country. Is that simply because of what the people growing up today are hearing at home, or what they're also learning at school? I guess, how much is education playing a role in the big picture ideology of the students today in high schools, and probably even starting in middle and elementary school?
Yeah. Here in Lowell, and a lot of people talk about, the influence of education in people's political beliefs, and they talk about the, cognitive race theory and stuff like that. But, that was never present in education at Lowell High School or my time in LPS. There was never biases that were present. I never felt like a certain viewpoint was being pushed. It was really all about the curriculum and, these certain set of things we were learning. So it's never really that opinions were pushed on me. But it's not to say that isn't happening in other places. Obviously, in a lot of southern states, the curriculum is being attuned a little bit more towards the conservativeness, and even in a little bit more liberal states, we're seeing curriculum that's being being DEI, just for lack of a better term. So it's on both ends of the spectrum. So I think, for me personally, I never had my personal beliefs dictated by school. Obviously, in school, you learn about history, and certain things in history can influence how you see contemporary history. But, I was someone, and I don't think a lot of kids are getting their viewpoints from school. I think a lot of it is becoming from what they're getting outside of school. So from home and from what they're seeing on their phones, their peers that they go to sports with and stuff like that. Because playing baseball, I can tell you, the crowd that plays baseball is different from the crowd that, maybe I'd be friends with inside of the school, right? And they come from different homes, and, their families have different beliefs, so they bring that with them. I think the home environment is really where a lot of politics is brewing. I think our parents are some of the people who really instill some of our first beliefs as human beings in us, and I think that's where it grows from. So absolutely, what's going on at home and what's going on in kids' personal lives is way more influential than what's going on in the schools when it comes to political beliefs.
Kendrick 𝐊𝐿, fascinating discussion. I feel like I learned a lot from you, and
Thank you.
I want to give you an open invitation. Anytime you have something you want to say or let people know about, I'd love to give you a platform to be able to share it out there, because I think your voice is important. I think you do speak for many in your generation, not all, but for many, and I think you speak in a way that's eloquent and informed enough where your voice should be out there. So
thank you. I appreciate it, Teddy.
all right, so you're going away to school, but you're going to stay active.
Oh, yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay, and you want to come back here and work. Giovanni, I hope you hit retirement age before he gets his degree, because he's coming.
No. I think we still need her direction. No, she's a great asset. But no, absolutely, Lowell is the place where I was born and raised. This is a city that I love. I aim to come back, give back to the community, work with DPD if I can, work on the city council if I can. It's all about giving back to the city that gave to me.
I was going to ask you, political career? You've been mentioned.
Yes. I'll be honest with you. It's on my radar. Obviously, with time, it's tough to run a campaign at 18 years old. Not planning on doing that. But, after college, once I'm back in Lowell settled, I think that's absolutely on the table, Teddy.
All right, I'm writing the draft story right now. I'll just insert the date.
Yeah, I
Kendrick
appreciate
Orbe announces city council.
Yes, sir. Yes, and yeah.
All right, thanks so much, Kendrick.
Thank you, Teddy. I appreciate it.
All right, we'll get you back here soon. Thank you to Kendrick. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. I hope you learned a little something. And I know it's easy for older generations, me, to kind of say, oh, this country's going to hell. The youth does this, the youth does that. They don't care about this, they don't care about that. You just heard from an 18-year-old who's intelligent, thoughtful, and articulate. I think the future of this city and the future of this country and probably the future of this world is in pretty good hands. And besides, just remember, folks, they said the same thing about us when we were 18 years old. The older generations told us we were lost, and we're still around. All right, thanks everybody for tuning in. Tomorrow, the Pod Squad, Mike Bacigalupo, Michaela Hondras McCarthy, aka Batch, and the Hyphen will be here for our week in review at Inside Lowell. Next week, I'll be with you Monday, Tuesday, and I'm going on a little vacation, but fear not, you will get 3 more daily pulses next Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from Madame President Danielle McFadden. So we'll give you a full week of the Daily Pulse. And as you know, Danielle is now Inside Lowell's sports correspondent. So she's going to do a lot of focus on youth sports, but also on education and on business. Her 3 passions as a president of the Chamber of Commerce, as a mother/school committee candidate. She cares about all of them: kids, education, and business. So all week long, the Daily Pulse. We'll finish out this week tomorrow. Full week for you next week. Drops at noon each and every day. InsideLowell.com. As we like to say, if Lowell is your home, Inside Lowell is your place. Till next time, stay safe, stay cool. I'll see you on the other side.